Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their moon in their natal chart in the first house. The first house is the house of the self, and it can include the appearance. And the moon is the heavenly body that's connected to our emotional nature, our habitual responses to life. And so needless to say, if you have the moon in the first house, you can be quite emotional in a very obvious way, where it's something that people notice. And whether or not you're emoting is a different story. It's just that you have the demeanor of somebody who is very vulnerable and sensitive. The moon rules the sign of Cancer. So there will be this Cancerian influence, which involves sensitivity. And as I stated before, that I would even say that moodiness, because Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon changes, that changeability in emotions, in one's emotional state. And so anybody with the moon in the first house has to guard against being too changeable in this area and learn techniques to stabilize their emotions so they are not controlled by their emotions. On the other hand, it can lend a great deal of sensitivity, compassion towards others, and there's a nurturing element with the moon in this house, including being a great cook, maybe enjoying cooking. If Cancer, the ruler of the sign that the moon rules, is on the cusp of the 6th house of work or the 10th house of career, the midheaven, that could also indicate that the person goes into some type of business that involves food. What do they call it? Not the food industry, the restaurant industry or things of that nature. So the moon is passive, and in the first house, this can lend a passivity to a person's basic nature. What makes this interesting is thinking about the moon in fire signs, which tend to confer aggression, and being masculine signs, more of that outward energy. So we're talking about moon in Aries or Leo or Sagittarius. So this would tend to mute that fire energy. Likewise, the air signs are also masculine. So they tend to also be more yang and therefore externalized rather than kind of going within. And so we're talking about Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, and these signs will also be muted to some degree. And even if the person has a sun sign that shows a lot of leadership, for instance, they will sometimes take a back seat to another person with the moon in the first house, because the moon is not desiring to be front and center, even in this first house. So it can be a very interesting scenario. You know what I was kind of thinking when I read this? I've gotten my information from a few different websites. And when I read that, one of those qualities, I was thinking about some of the greatest actors of this day, including somebody that I think is a great actor like Daniel Day-Lewis. And I have no idea, if the moon is in his first house. So maybe that isn't even a good way of trying to illustrate this. But I think of some of these people who are performers, and they don't have a persona outside of their craft of acting. In other words, there's some actors who are also, like perennial celebrities. And then there are some who they do their roles and then they go off into obscurity until they do their next role. And I find that the people who are like that tend to be the best actors because they're not focused on the celebrity aspect. They really take their craft seriously, and they lose themselves into their role. And I really believe that people with the moon in the first house can be incredible channels for different characters, because it's not to say that they don't have a personality or a core self, but that they are very fluid, because the moon is so changeable, that they are very impressionable with whatever environment that they find themselves in. And therefore, they can slip in and out of different characters and roles, and they may even seem different at times. Just like their moods can change, their appearance can change, because the first house can be the actual body, the actual appearance. A person with the moon in the first house can actually have a moon face. This is one of the greatest ways to kind of gauge whether somebody may be either Cancer rising or have the moon in the first house, is you see that moon face. And I know one example in my personal life where that is so true. And now that I know this, it all makes sense. And going along with that, when it comes to appearance, the ability to retain water, anybody who has a rising sign that is a water sign, so that would be Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, could also have this. But somebody with the moon in the first house could retain water because of having the moon in this particular placement. And the tides of the ocean connected with the moon, of course. And that influence of water not only can affect the way the person looks, but as I said, their emotional nature can be quite impressionable, psychic, and also needy emotionally. There can be a clingy personality that really is hungry for love, hungry for acceptance, because the first house, to have the moon here, is connection with the mother and wanting, not to be rejected by the mother, wanting that acceptance, is also broadened to wanting it from everyone, because the first house is the house of the self. And although the sun is very open about wanting recognition for who they are, the moon is not going to be that direct. It's going to be on the emotional rather than the egoic level, where the person feels very strongly about wanting to be recognized by others. And this doesn't have to be in a, show business kind of a way. I think that the sun in the first house is more, because it's extroverted, it is more acclimated to the idea of showing off. Whereas the moon in the first house is more interested in receiving love from others, receiving that kind of emotional support. And yet, there may be, for people who are ambitious, and I would say especially if somebody has the sun in what I would consider some of the more ambitious signs, all of the fire signs, and maybe Capricorn and of the earth element, maybe Capricorn and, I don't know, the air signs. I think the air signs also, because they are masculine. Masculine signs, the air and the fire, will be more conventionally ambitious, because that is what it represents. It's more active than passive. So these signs may want that kind of recognition in a worldly sense that connects with career, but there is an emotional demand placed on it. They want to feel emotionally fulfilled. So it's not just about stroking the ego, but it's actually about something, and sometimes I think that there's a creative component in that, or even a spiritual one, where the person feels like they're really maybe touching others in an emotional way, and that makes them feel good, or something along those lines. And the connection with the mother cannot be understated. There is going to be that identification with and connection with the mother. Likewise, this is a very maternal person. Regardless of other things that might be going on, this person will tend to be very caring and catering towards others, wanting to make sure that they're comfortable and well-fed and safe. The moon in the first house can create a lot of, I don't want to say paranoia, but distrust, mistrust, I never know which is the proper word, of strangers, of those that are not part of their clan, their inner circle, their family, their kinfolk, whatever you want to call it. Because the moon is that feminine energy, and it's very subjective, and so it's going to be really concerned with their personal life. And that means that things that are different, new, not part of the insular world, may be seen as a threat. And so the person, there's always that security mindedness. When you have the moon here, it's like protecting, like that fortress. And so it can make the person a little bit timid, I think, as well. And that can lead to, not being so extroverted. Even if the person is a fire sign or an air sign, and typically is that way. And also, there's just great subjectivity in general. So everything is filtered through the personal experiences. It's very hard for the person to see things in a impersonal way. They're incredibly personal. And that can sometimes lead to, I would say, even prejudices. Again, because of the fear of the unknown and that subjectivity. If something bad happened to them that connects to a certain thing, they may, broaden it to include everything of that particular ilk, and they wouldn't necessarily have an open mind to accept that might just be one experience and not indicative of everything in that. Because the thing is that the emotions take over, and likewise there's that sense of wanting that security, partly because there's a great vulnerability with this placement. And so that can, lead to having, maybe even being a little bit fearful, maybe even being, like I said, apprehensive. If somebody has a moon in a fixed sign. So we're talking about Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Leo. They may not like how changeable their life can be, and they may resist that change, and it might be harder for them to kind of cope with some of the differences, because this is the first house, so it's kind of setting the stage for the person's life, and they may have a lot of changes in their life, and because of having the moon in this first house, and that can sometimes be perfectly fine for some people. They may enjoy having frequent change, but for others, it can be uncomfortable, and it may make them even more controlling because they're trying to prevent unwanted change from occurring. But regardless of whether or not they try to do that, they still have to deal with that. That becomes the theme of life that they have to face. So anyway, I hope that this resonated with those of you who have this placement, and take care. Bye.